Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Maria, and the story I'm about to share with you is, well, it's a difficult one. It's about how the person you love most in the world, the person you'd sacrifice anything for, can be the one to push you to the very edge. But it's also a story about what happens when you decide not to fall, but to build wings instead. It's about reclaiming your life, one quiet decision at a time. Before I get into it, if you're new here, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and you won't want to miss the stories we share. It all came to a head on my mother's 64th birthday. I'd spent 2 days preparing. I know it sounds like a lot, but I wanted it to be perfect. I made her absolute favorite meal: poached salmon with a delicate lemon butter sauce, carrots roasted with honey and thyme until they were sweet and caramelized, and for dessert, a peach tart made completely from scratch with a flaky crust that took me 3 tries to get just right. I even pulled out the old floral linen tablecloth, the one with the slightly frayed edges she always used to scold me about but secretly adored. In my mind, I pictured a quiet evening, maybe even a peaceful one. For the first time in a long time, I let myself hope this year might be different. The table was set for 6. My mother, Vera, sat at the head, looking regal as always. To her sides were her best friend and bridge partner, June, our cousin Lori, and 2 neighbors who had known me since I was a little girl running around with scraped knees. I moved around the table, pouring the wine, offering second helpings, making sure everyone was comfortable. I smiled until my cheeks ached, playing the part of the devoted daughter. For a little while, it was almost easy to pretend this was a normal, loving family gathering. Then Vera raised her wine glass. A hush fell over the table. "A toast," she announced, a small, smug smirk playing on her lips as she swirled the deep red liquid. "To aging, without baggage," she said, her eyes scanning the room, "and to finally having a life free of dead weight." And then her eyes landed directly on me. She held my gaze, and the smirk widened. "Honestly, Maria," she said, her voice clear and cutting in the sudden silence, "the best gift you could possibly give me is to just leave my life for good." No one spoke. The air grew thick and heavy. June let out a soft, nervous cough into her napkin. Lori's fork, halfway to her mouth, paused and hung there in midair. I just stared back at my mother, my mind a complete blank. I blinked once, then twice, trying to process the words, trying to make them mean something else. But there was no other meaning. I didn't ask her to clarify. I couldn't bear to hear it again. With a calmness that didn't feel like my own, I slowly stood up. I excused myself with a smile I'm sure looked more like a grimace, and I walked to the kitchen. I stood at the sink and rinsed my hands under the cool tap water, letting it run over my skin until my fingers started to feel numb. Then I took my coat from the hook by the back door, and without a single word, I left. That night, I just sat in my dimly lit kitchen, still wearing my coat. The beautiful peach tart sat untouched on the counter, a perfect, golden symbol of my failed efforts. The sink was filled with empty glasses, stained with red wine, and only half rinsed. I looked at the empty chair where she had sat, back straight, eyes triumphant, and I wondered how long she'd been practicing that line. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe it was just instinct for her, as natural as breathing. My mind started to drift back through all the birthdays that came before this one. I thought of the hand-sewn gifts I'd make her as a child, my small fingers struggling with the needle and thread. I thought of the years I decorated her front porch with dozens of candles just because I knew it made her smile. I thought of the decades, literally decades of my life spent trying to earn a kind of love and approval that she simply never intended to give. I finally got up, wrapped the tart in plastic and put it in the fridge. I looked at the mountain of dirty dishes, and for the first time in my life, I left them. I went to bed with the taste of silence in my mouth and her cruel words ringing in my ears like a death knell. The next morning, I opened my journal to a fresh, blank page, and it stayed blank for a very long time. I held the pen, but my hand wouldn't move. It just hovered over the paper as if it was waiting for permission to write, permission I'd never been given. And in the stillness of that quiet morning, the memories started to flood in, uninvited and unwelcome. I was 26 when I dropped out of graduate school. It was supposed to be the making of my career, a program I had worked tirelessly to get into. But then Vera slipped on a patch of ice outside her front porch and fractured her hip. "You're all I have, Maria," she'd said over the phone, her voice so thin and fragile, laced with a kind of manipulation I was too young and too full of love to recognize at the time. I remember the look on my professor's face when I told him I wouldn't be finishing the semester. "Just take a leave of absence," he urged gently. "Don't throw this away." I nodded and promised I would, but in my heart, I think I knew. I never went back. I moved back into her house that week. It was only supposed to be temporary, just until she was back on her feet. But somehow the temporary situation stretched on. The years passed in small, quiet increments. Doctor's appointments, medication schedules, grocery runs, endless errands. I took a part-time job at the local library. It was quiet, close to home, and had flexible hours. I dated a little, but never seriously. How could I? Every time a man would ask about my future, about our future, I'd find a way to gracefully change the subject. My future was on hold. When Vera decided she wanted to freshen up the house, I agreed without a fight. She painted over the sunny yellow hallway I'd always loved, replacing it with a cold, sterile gray. "It's more modern," she declared, and I convinced myself it didn't matter. It was still home, right? Even if it didn't feel like mine anymore. I let her throw out the comfortable armchair I'd bought with my very first paycheck. I just laughed it off when she called it tacky in front of her friends. I said yes to every little no she imposed on my life. That was our rhythm, our dance. She would ask, and I would adjust. But now, sitting here in the quiet of this new, broken morning, it all felt so different. The pattern wasn't one of devotion. It was one of disappearance. It had been a slow, methodical unraveling of who I was, strand by single strand, until I couldn't tell where I ended and her endless expectations began. I finally lowered the pen to the page and wrote the first true thing I'd felt in years. I gave up so much trying not to make her feel alone, but I never once stopped to ask if I was allowed to want more for myself than just surviving her. The ink bled into the page like a tear. I tore the page out, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the back of the journal. Then, I pulled open the old filing cabinet in the corner of the room and began looking for my bank statements. I didn't sleep that night. My mind paced the floors of my memory, even as my body lay perfectly still. I replayed every single moment I should have said something, every time I should have drawn a line in the sand, every choice I failed to make that would have centered me instead of her. But I hadn't. I had waited for the situation to become completely unbearable before I even dared to name it. In the morning, I made myself a cup of tea, but I didn't drink it. I sat at the kitchen table, opened a new journal to a fresh page, and wrote a sentence that felt as if it had been waiting decades to exist. I have been edited out of my own life. The words landed harder on the paper than they did in my chest. I read them over and over, then underlined them, and then I began to plan. I made a list of everything Vera had access to, the joint bank accounts we'd set up for convenience, the deed to the house which was still in both our names, even my personal password scribbled on a notepad she kept in the kitchen drawer, always pretending she didn't know it was there. I circled the things that had to change immediately. Next, I gathered every piece of paperwork I could find: insurance forms, old bank statements, and the will I had foolishly signed years ago without even reading it properly. I called the bank and scheduled an appointment for the next day, my voice steady as I requested to remove her as an authorized user from all my accounts. I searched for legal referrals and found a small, discreet law office 2 towns over. The lawyer's name was Thomas Reyes. I liked the sound of it. It sounded firm, not flashy. I didn't tell a soul what I was doing. Not Lori, not my neighbors, and certainly not Vera. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about air. It was about finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for more than a decade. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway and looked around the house. Not with sentiment, but with a cold precision. What was truly mine? What had been a gift? And what had been taken from me without my consent? My eyes landed on the old maple desk by the window. It had been my father's, the last thing he touched before he passed away. I slowly opened the top drawer and pulled out the small, worn envelope where he used to keep a little emergency cash. It was empty. A sharp, cold pang of betrayal hit me harder than the toast. This wasn't just about control. It was about theft. The next day, I drove to meet the lawyer. Vera started to notice the shift. Not right away, but soon enough. I stopped reminding her about her appointments. I no longer filled the long silences between us with polite, meaningless conversation. I started cooking only for myself, using the small frying pan instead of the large one we used to share. She began to hover again, her presence a constant, low-grade pressure. She'd offer these half-sincere smiles and comment on my clothes, like she was trying to sound like a caring, maternal figure. One morning, she tapped on my bedroom door holding a tray with burnt toast and oversteeped tea. "I figured you'd be tired," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "We haven't talked much since, well, you know." She waved a hand vaguely, pretending not to remember the words she had so carefully etched into the center of my chest. "You mean since your birthday?" I asked, my voice flat. She blinked, feigning surprise. "Oh, that! Oh, come on, Maria. It was just a joke. I was a little tipsy. You know how people say things." I nodded slowly, but didn't open the door to let her in. Later that week, I sat across from a kind-faced bank manager as she pulled up my account history on her screen. I watched her professional expression slowly change, her eyebrows knitting together as she scrolled through line after line of transactions. "Someone's been transferring funds from your savings quite regularly," she said, turning the monitor toward me. "They're small amounts, but they're consistent. It adds up to over $6,000 in this past year alone." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. In my heart, I already knew. That evening, I found Vera in the laundry room, folding towels. She looked up with that tired, put-on expression she wore like a suit of armor. "I saw the withdrawals," I said simply. She straightened up, her movement suddenly stiff. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "My savings account?" Thousands of dollars, taken without my asking. Vera let out an exasperated sigh and dropped a towel into the basket. "You're overreacting. It was for things we needed. House repairs, my prescriptions, your car maintenance." "You never asked me," I repeated. "You wouldn't have minded," she snapped, her voice sharp. "God, Maria, you're being so incredibly selfish." I just stared at her. "Selfish?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us. "Yes, selfish," she said, her voice rising. "You act like you're owed something special just for living here." I didn't reply. I just turned and walked past her, up the stairs and into my room. I locked the door behind me, not because I was afraid of her, but because I no longer had the energy to explain a boundary out loud. It was time to build one. The next morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. It was in a plain white envelope with no return address, but I recognized the neat, slightly slanted handwriting before I even opened it. It was from Mrs. Darnell, the quiet woman who lived 2 doors down. We'd only spoken maybe a dozen times in 15 years. She always waved from her porch, but never lingered. "Dear Maria," the letter began, "I hope you don't mind me writing this.
I don't want to intrude, but I've watched from my window for a long time. Not to be nosy, but simply to bear witness. I've seen what you've carried, what you've given, and the way you make yourself smaller to make others more comfortable. You are not invisible, Maria, and you are not wrong for wanting your own life. With quiet admiration, Elaine Darnell.
I read it twice, then a third time, just to feel the warmth of the words sink in. My eyes stung, not from sadness, but from the profoundly foreign comfort of being truly seen without having to explain a single thing. I folded the letter along its original crease and slipped it into the back pocket of my journal, right next to the torn-out page I had written after the birthday dinner. It didn't fix anything, not really, but it steadied something inside me that had been wobbling for years. That evening, I made dinner for myself and didn't offer to share. Vera didn't ask. When the dishes were done, I opened my laptop and searched for a notary public near the county clerk's office. I had already spoken with Tomas Reyes again. The next step was signing the documents. I checked the locks on the doors before I went to bed, then placed the journal on my nightstand where I could see it, a small book of evidence and resolve. The next morning, I dressed in quiet, unassuming clothes and drove to the attorney's office. Tomas was exactly what I needed: calm, measured, and precise. His office smelled faintly of cedar and old books, and the walls were lined with certificates I didn't need to read. I trusted him from the moment he shook my hand and said, "You don't need a war, Maria. You need a boundary that holds." We spent the better part of an hour signing papers. He walked me through every single step: freezing the joint accounts, filing the paperwork to update the house deed to my name alone, and completely revising my will. At the end, he slid the final form toward me. My hand hesitated for only a fraction of a second before I signed my name. My new signature, firm and clear. Outside, the wind had picked up, and by the time I got home, the first fat drops of rain had started to fall. Vera was in the kitchen, hunched over her crossword puzzle. She looked up as I came in. "Where have you been?" "Out," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "You've been distant lately, and secretive. I don't like it." I said nothing. I just went upstairs. That night, the storm came, not from the sky, but through my phone. It started with a voicemail from my cousin Rachel. "Maria, what is going on over there? Your mom just called me, hysterical. She said you're freezing her out of her own money. That's just cruel." Then came the texts from old family friends, passive-aggressive messages, just checking in because they'd heard some worrying things. And then Lori, who didn't bother with the sugarcoating. "I can't believe you would do this to her after everything she's done for you." I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and let it buzz itself into silence. Downstairs, I could hear doors slamming harder than they needed to. Cabinet drawers were opened and shut with sharp, angry intent. Vera was moving through the house with heavy, deliberate footsteps, as if the sound alone could carry for blame up the stairs and through my locked door. I stayed in my room and wrote it all down in my journal. I am not punishing her. I am reclaiming what is mine. The next morning, Vera banged on my door. "You've made your point, Vera," she snapped through the wood. "Now undo it." I opened the door, just enough to speak through the crack. "It's not a game. It's nothing to undo." She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. "You'll regret this." "Maybe, but at least this regret will be mine." I shut the door gently and locked it. 2 days later, an official notice was delivered to the house, notarized, legally binding, and irreversible. By the end of that week, Vera was gone. She didn't say goodbye. I heard her just after dawn, dragging her luggage across the hardwood floors. Her voice, sharp and muttering, carried through the walls as she complained to someone on the phone who was coming to pick her up. A car idled out front for 10 minutes, then the front door slammed shut, and I heard nothing else. I waited a full hour before I dared to come downstairs. The living room was eerily still. A few picture frames were missing from the mantelpiece, and some drawers in the side table were left open. But the bones of the house had stayed. It was my house now. My name and mine alone was on the deed, uncontested. The quiet pressed in on me from all sides, but this time it didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like breath. It felt like space. I started slowly. The painting of wildflowers I'd done in college, the one she'd made me take down and hide in a closet 5 years ago, I hung it back up right above the fireplace. I changed the harsh, bright bulbs in the hallway to warm, soft light. I brought my grandmother's old quilt down from the attic and spread it over the couch. The blue and green stitching was still soft and familiar under my palms. I opened every single window in the house and let the cool autumn air move through each room until it carried the last traces of her scent away. Later that evening, I found an old tea tin at the back of the kitchen cupboard, the one I used to keep my special herbal blends in before Vera declared it clutter. I brewed a cup and drank it on the back porch, my legs tucked under me as the sun slipped below the trees. I thought I might cry, but I didn't. Not then. Instead, I just sat there with a sense of calm so profound and so quiet that I almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't victory. It was something else entirely. It was the feeling of returning home to myself. That night, for the first time in 15 years, I slept with my bedroom door wide open.